Introduction to vSphere Data Protection. In this module, I'll introduce VMware vSphere Data Protection. Um, Specifically, we'll take a look at the benefits, the architecture, the requirements, and the limitations of vSphere Data Protection. Once we get the theoretical part covered, we'll get into the deployment in the following module. So let's get right into this. vSphere Data Protection is VMware proprietary backup and recovery solution. It integrates fully with our vCenter server and the vSphere web client. And it provides for disk-based backup of virtual machines and applications on those virtual machines. Um, the vSphere Data Protection is based on the EMC Avamar deduplication backup and recovery software. And it is included with our vSphere Essential Plus licensing and above. So Essential Plus and above, vSphere Data Protection would be included in. There's currently only one edition of vSphere Data Protection. Sorry. Previously, there was the standard vSphere Data Protection and the Advanced Edition. We would have required a separate license for the advanced edition previously, but it's only one version or one edition of this now, so we don't need to deal with that additional licensing. Okay, so let's take a look at the benefits. Just a little summary here of the benefits of vSphere Data Protection. So we have built-in deduplication technology. vSphere Data Protection uses the variable length Avamar deduplication technology. So this significantly reduces the storage space that would be needed for our backups. Next, I have easy wizard-driven management. As we'll see in our demonstration, vSphere Data Protection uses a simple wizard for setup and management, and also for management of our backups and recovery operations. Third, we have change block tracking. vSphere Data Protection uses change block tracking, or CBT. It uses this to reduce the load on our vSphere infrastructure and also to reduce the time it takes for backup. Okay, and finally we have agentless backup and restore. vSphere Data Protection does not require an agent to be installed on our VM for backup and restore. Some backup software would require this. So this significantly reduces the complexity and the deployment time of the vSphere Data Protection solution. All right, so this would continue on our next slide here. For Microsoft Exchange Server, Microsoft SQL Server, and Microsoft SharePoint agents, vSphere Data Protection does not, vSphere Data Protection does provide the ability to backup and restore our individual databases and mailboxes through its agent. So utilizing the agent, we can also backup and restore individual databases on Microsoft SQL Server. The Microsoft SharePoint agent provides for fine-grained backup and recovery of SharePoint databases. These agents can be downloaded using the vSphere web client and then installed into the guest OS running either Microsoft Exchange SQL or SharePoint server. But once we get to the demonstration, we will do this and then perform a restore operation. Okay. So next in our list here, I have source and target side restore. So with vSphere Data Protection, we have the ability to replicate data to a target site in addition to our backup operations. So along with this, we have the ability to initiate restore operation from both the source location and backup or replication target location. This is especially useful in cases where our source VM may no longer be available, and we need to restore from the target site. VMware also calls this direct to host emergency restore. So it's basically restoring a VM with the vCenter server being offline. Okay, so automated backup verification. vSphere data protection can do test restore on our VMs to verify the integrity of that VM and its files. The way this works is the VM is restored from backup without the network being connected to avoid any conflict. So once this is restored and tested, the restored VM is deleted from this automatically to free up the space that the restore operation would have used. And finally, we have file level restore. We can do a granular file and folder level restore on our VM. So how this works is we connect to a web address from within the guest OS and perform the restore operation. But once we get to the demonstration, we'll demonstrate file level restore. Okay, so let's continue with the architecture here of vSphere data protection. So the vSphere data protection appliance can be deployed on both the Windows-based vCenter server and the Linux-based vCenter server appliance. vCenter single sign-on a server is also required for the vSphere data protection deployment. This should not be an issue since SSO would be deployed with the vCenter server. What should be noted here too is the vSphere data protection can be deployed on various editions of vSphere. So we can basically deploy vSphere data protection version 6.1 on lower editions of vSphere, including vSphere 5.5 and 6.0. Okay. Also, we would need a browser with the Adobe Flash Player enabled so we can access the data protection functionality that is enabled in the vSphere web client. The vSphere data protection really is a pre-configured virtual appliance. So one deployment of vCenter server can support up to 20 vSphere data protection appliances. Each appliance is deployed with 4 vCPU and 4 gigs of memory. And we can set the capacity of the deduplicated backup data during the deployment of the appliance. So we'll see this in the next module once we get to the deployment. So a single appliance supports as much as 8 terabytes of the duplicated backup data capacity, and also up to 400 VMs are supported per appliance. But we'll have a look at this once we get to the deployment of the OVA appliance in a little bit. So the vSphere data protection appliance can be deployed to a number of data stores. We could deploy this locally. We could deploy this to virtual SAN, to our SAN. We could deploy this to NFS data stores also. So the VMDKs that makes up the appliance, they can be stored on the same data store, or we can split them among the different data stores that we have in our infrastructure. A neat feature of the appliance deployment is the ability to detach the VMDK that stores the backup data partition. So we can detach this and attach it to another appliance. Useful case for this is if our vSphere data protection appliance is corrupted, for example, or if we lose it, we can simply do a new deployment of the appliance and reattach the backup data VMDK. Okay. Let's get to the requirements. In terms of requirements, you would firstly want to ensure that you have static IP addresses configured for firstly the vSphere data protection appliance for your vCenter server and also for your ESXi host. Secondly, you would want to ensure that you have both forward and reverse host records set up on your DNS server. Both for the vSphere data protection appliance and the vCenter server. Also, you would want to set this up for your ESXi host too. You'd want to ensure that the host is at ESXi version 5.5 and above. If not, you'd want to upgrade your host before continuing with the vSphere data protection appliance deployment. And finally, you'd want to ensure that you have vCenter server, SSO, and inventory services configured in your environment. And this should not be a problem since once you're using or once you have your vCenter server deployed in the environment, these other services would be deployed too. Okay, so let's just take a look at the limitations of vSphere data protection. And once we get this out of the way, the theoretical part, we'll just get into the deployment. In terms of limitations, the vSphere data protection does not support the backup or the backing up of VMs with larger than 2 terabyte capacity. So also we cannot back up vSphere data protection appliance itself. Neither backup templates nor secondary fault tolerance nodes. Continuing here with our limitations of vSphere data protection. Once we have a storage vMotion operation executed, our vSphere data protection backup jobs would auto update the location in that backup job. However, this only works if the backup job was for the entire VM and not if the job was configured for backing up of individual VM decays within that VM. So you'll just want to keep this limitation in mind. Finally, we cannot recover a VM decay to the target. Excuse me. We cannot recover the VM decay to the target VM if there is a snapshot present for that VM. We would first have to delete the snapshot, then perform the recovery operation. Actually, this applies to other backup systems too, and not just for vSphere data protection, since the third-party backup tools will leverage the underlying vStorage API for data protection.